So, some of my research around culture pre pandemic, but very useful now that we're in the thick of things, is related to the different types of cultures that appear in classrooms. So, usually we start a new class and we have students come in, and it's never the same group twice most of the time. And so, we begin usually in shallow culture. We have a sense of who the individuals are in the room. We might have a leader emerge from the masses, but most of the time we start out as very separate. Maybe a few people have a buddy to sit beside that they know, but most students are not familiar with each other individually, maybe if you're in a large school, or even as a group if you haven't had a class that moves forward consistently, like a French immersion group together. So, shallow culture is not a bad place to start. There's a lot of opportunity there. One thing to watch for, though, is if you start out and you're not sure, you might be in shark infested culture. So, shallow culture and shark infested can look fairly similar at the very beginning. And there's a few things to look for to see where you're at. So, shark infested may not be apparent in those first few weeks as everybody's on their best behavior, but you can look for competition. So, is there a sense of one upsmanship or a competitive spirit that has a little dark side to it that's showing up for your students? Um, are they separating into us versus them groups in class conversations? If you had a debate, who is working against the others, or can there be balanced conversation and we wait for one person who has the floor to finish before we share an idea or take a turn? So, shark infested is a little bit of a tricky one, especially with being online. If you're in shark infested culture, it might not be safe for people to have their cameras on. They might not feel comfortable to share their ideas in such an isolating way, meaning that you're speaking out with your voice and everybody else can hear you. And it's quite a platform in a way that a classroom doesn't often highlight that individual the same way. So, shark infested is a little bit trickier to move away from. If you're finding this culture is existing in your classroom, especially online, what I'd suggest is if it's possible, find ways for students to take steps closer to each other. It's really hard to hate people close up, as Brene Brown says. And by getting curious, sometimes you can bypass those judgments. Not always. So there are some times where the groups are so competitive, so shark infested, it's so unsafe for students to share that I have gone to more individual work for the whole, maybe not for the whole semester, but certainly while we're online. If it's not a place to share ideas and feel safe and comfortable, then it's probably not something that I will lean heavily on or try to require of students, because I already know that that's not going to feel safe or comfortable for them. So, shallow culture, you can definitely move into a deeper culture or deep culture. This is, my ideal shift is that a class, I do things that can help them see each other for who they are and come together. A lot of story sharing, a lot of, oh, that happened to you too. I had no idea. Oh, you broke a bone as well. Like all these kinds of histories that we don't see at face value. But it does take some time and investment. You have to make space for conversation, make space for students to connect without teacher intervention. So, definitely an interesting place to go. But if you can make it into deep culture or even deepen your culture, what you'll find is that students feel comfortable to share. Students can ask for and offer help. That's a real sign of deep culture. If I'm only ever able to offer help and I can never ask for it, I have no ability to show any kind of weakness. And in that case, if I can only offer help, that means that the other person shouldn't show weakness and ask for it either. So we create a lot of permissions when we model these behaviors for students. It's not a bad thing to say, hey, I can't make my tech work. Anybody have a suggestion? This is what my screen looks like. Sometimes they fix everything. It's magical. So some metrics to assess culture. If I ask a question, what happens? Is the classroom silent? Is everybody looking at each other and waiting for the person who will talk, or avoiding making eye contact? Are we able to have a conversational response, meaning somebody can answer and someone else can reply and engage, and a conversation flows? Maybe we're listening to each other and waiting for our turn to speak and share. Maybe we are making sure that the person who has something to say, who's been overlooked, gets their turn. So asking a question can be really interesting and revealing. If I ask a question and only one student who I directly ask that question to is comfortable to respond and only responds to me, Shark-infested culture, most likely, or very shallow at this stage. So it's definitely a very revealing process. This does not necessarily translate the same way online. Of course, we don't know what's happening behind all these screens. And so this may not be your best metric if you're starting the class online. But a really great bypass is to start with some storytelling and sharing low risk questions, low risk stories, but things that will help people get comfortable. Have you ever thrown up in public? Is a great question. Start with that and see what people have to say. Make sure you have a story too. Don't ask them to share if you are not going to model that vulnerability and courage first as well. Um, our default setting, this is a tough one. I love to ask the question, would you say generally people are doing their best? And I know I've mentioned her twice already, but Brene Brown is the inceptor of this idea. The idea being, if we think that we are already doing our best, we can also extend that possibility and perspective to people around us. And if we think that they are not doing their best, often it's because we feel the same way about ourselves. So this is a really interesting thing to explore, especially in an online class. Having students who are willing to help each other out with tech is a really great place to start. So, feel free to sit back and not be so quick to help solve those problems, because you might have students who emerge as these culture leaders in the classroom and want to help out each other. And even students who are asking for that help are showing that vulnerability and willingness to connect. If the cameras are on, you're in deep culture. That is magical. And if you can, there's a few things you can do to encourage students to bring their cameras. This is one of my favorite weird little dollar store purchases from this year. But I had all kinds of fun little props and just things that we could share in the background, or things that, maybe my attendance question was, okay, show me something with a cheetah on it. Go find something. So a lot of ways to just sort of make students feel more comfortable, even if they're just turning their camera on for a moment to say hi. That's awesome. That makes them that's awesome. They are then, extending that possibility for connection, and they'll probably get more and more comfortable as time goes on. So something to keep in mind, if it's not happening at the beginning, it doesn't mean it's never going to happen.